Varmt välkomna. Om en liten stund kommer jag byta till engelska, men den första korta introduktionen blir på svenska. Välkomna som sagt till Under Ytan, en podcast eller podd-tv-serie som vi kör tillsammans med Veckans Affärer. Och idag sitter vi på Hilton, Slussen här i Stockholm, och jag har det stora nöjet att presentera ytterligare en spännande gäst som tillsammans med oss ska tänka lite och säga lite om framtiden. Som vi har sagt tidigare, som ni säkert har talat om, så är den här poddserien handlar om det nya näringslivet. Hur många företag och företagsledare faktiskt eftersträvar att kunna kombinera mening med resultat. Hur vi kan skapa värde som betyder mer, som driver affärer men samtidigt har ett tydligt syfte och bidrar till ett bättre och hållbarare samhälle. Och därmed skulle jag vilja byta till engelska för att introducera vår nästa gäst. So our guest at this week's program is nobody less than Peter Hopkinson. You are a professor of innovation and sustainable strategies at University of Bradford, Faculty of Management, and you are here in Stockholm today.
Yes.
Warm welcome and nice to have you here.
Yes, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First time to Stockholm, or?
Virtually, I came 25 years ago.
Okay.
But I can't remember what I did or even where I stayed. So let's treat this as the first time.
Yeah, that's good. And you brought your wife as well.
I
this
did.
Time.
Yes, yeah, that was quite a thing as well. She was listening in on my presentation just now. So.
Okay, great. You got a chance to also see a little bit of Stockholm here last night.
We did. Yeah, we went around the old town and found a nice restaurant. So yeah, it's been great.
Nice. And you just finished a presentation here not long ago at all. What was that? What brought you to Sweden today?
Well, I got an email from somebody who I'd never heard of, who was organising this event and had heard about some of the work that I'd been doing in this area, and asked me if I'd be interested and willing to come over and talk. And I had reasons that I needed to come to this part of the world. So tomorrow I'm heading off to Helsinki. So it was a good fit, and I was intrigued by the development of the circular economy in Sweden and the fact it was being headlined as a key idea for this year's innovation conference.
Yeah. So what Peter has done is been a keynote speaker at Veckans Affärers Framtidsdag, or the Day of the Future. And I guess any day is the day of the future, isn't it? If you will. But they made a particular day, the Day of the Future. It's a great lineup of speakers. But since the session here next one was in Swedish, then we popped out and scheduled this talk instead. So very happy and honored to have you with us today. Just like you've been mentioning now, the topic of your speech and the reason for your visit here is that you have worked for many years now in the field of circular economy. We might come back to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so forth, but let's just start. What is this notion or idea of the circular economy?
Well, for those who've not heard of it before, one of the best ways to think about it is in contrast to a linear economy.
Yeah.
So the linear economy is characterized as an economy where you take stuff out the ground, you make stuff, and then you sell it, and then you dispose. The end user disposes of it. It's that take, make, dispose economy.
Yeah.
So many of the industrial economies around the world are characterized in that way. And you only have to look around you to see some of the benefits of that economy. So we're not condemning or criticising it, but you look at the amount of waste, the amount of pollution, the amount of resources that is required to operate that model. And a lot of data from around the world and studies suggest that we might be coming to the end of that era, or that era just cannot be sustained, because we are seeing rocketing prices in commodities and resources and energy. We're seeing price volatility. So the question is, well, what do we do? What do we do? So resource efficiency is one strategy that people have tended to make or take to overcome some of those problems, but it's not enough. So we need a new economic model.
Yeah.
So in the UK, the circular economy became very, very popular about 4 or 5 years ago, stimulated by the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and since has been taken on by others. And it proposes a new economic model, which is to design an economy to ensure that materials and resources flow in repeat cycles for maximum value and for maximum profit before you eventually dispose of them, or that they end up being returned safely back into the biosphere. The ideal is that you keep certain materials flowing for as long as you can. Eventually, all materials will eventually degrade, but you can cascade those into other uses progressively. So rather than using them once for a small amount of time, you can use them multiple times for a long period of time.
And make money doing it.
This is the really interesting thing, the analysis and insight that's been undertaken around some of these circular business models demonstrates that you can achieve significant increased margin, profitability, increased customer satisfaction, new markets, new market segments, all driven by innovation, all driven by profit, all driven by the fact that that if we don't do this, if we don't do it, we don't know what the alternative is. You know, if we're coming to the end of the linear, then some businesses are going to disappear.
So there's a real sense of urgency, if you will, around these questions, and I assume that some companies, or we know as a matter of fact, that some companies are of course more prone to take on the urgency and do something about it, whereas some people are still, let's say, sticking to the linear model.
Well, if you're in an industry, a sector, or a business, and that you are seeing resource, commodity, energy price increases, and that they are wiping out your profitability for that year, well, what do you do? I mean, if you're the chief executive, if you're the board, what do? You sort of say, well, if we carry on like this, we're not going to be here next year. So there's a very interesting talk by Carlos Tavares, from the Chief Operating Officer from Renault, who gave the story that in 1 year they saw commodity price increases, input price increases. I can't remember the exact figure, but something like 400 or 500 million euros, which was just about the same as their profit for that same year.
Gotcha.
So that's a big strategic challenge for a company like that. And they're sort of saying, well, what's the alternative? So they started to get really interested in this area and started to say, well, the business model's got to change. What sort of company are we going to be in 5 years' time? So the strapline was, we're not a company that's going to sell cars. We're going to transform into a company that sells mobility. And that's an interesting idea. So it's quite a transformation in thinking and strategy. If you are confronted by these pressures and these stresses on your bottom line.
Is there, you also talk in your work about a few different ways of embracing the circular economy and reinventing the model, if you will. Business model reinvention is one way of doing it.
That's right.
Renault was an example. Do you have another good example of how a new business model have?
Well, there's many different ways. You know, some of the areas that you can look at would be to change your material inputs in the first instance. So if you have material inputs into your manufacturing or your production process that are hazardous, toxic, dangerous, why are you doing that? So you need, you know, those create externalities, they create costs, they create all sorts of problems for you, just for you, let alone what happens when they go out to the consumer and eventually into the environment. So you start to think about why we might do that. So I gave an example in this morning's talk about polystyrene, styrofoam packaging. We all know what a fantastic product that is in context. It's very lightweight, it's been low cost, it serves all sorts of purposes, but it's a terrible material to handle. It's got very high volume to mass, so And people have been trying to explore alternatives to that for years. And so the example I gave this morning is the mushroom packaging from the United States. And when you first hear about that, you think, well, that can't possibly replace this type of packaging. Surely it can't, but it is. That's the really interesting thing. So you can change your material inputs. You can then, the other really interesting areas around collaborative consumption, around the sharing economy, which is often some old ways that the economy used to run, but reinvented through technology. So we used to go to the library, take a book out, read it, take it back. Okay, repeat use. And that's got increasingly sort of marginalised through online bookstores and Kindles, etc., etc. But what the collaborative consumption does is to enable people to utilise their assets to much greater potential. So the classic example is Airbnb, which has now got a higher market capitalisation and more bed space than the Hilton chain. And they've done it in 5 years compared to a century for Hilton. And that is really interesting. So you can apply that same principle to car sharing, to transport, to clothes, to furniture, to anything that is a product or an asset.
Yeah. Speaking of clothes, and you were also speaking earlier of mushrooms, makes me think of another example.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of interesting products or things that we consume that actually the waste of those products can help supply the mushroom business. Right. You talked about whiskey this morning.
Yes.
Here in Sweden, which is of course a big thing for you guys in the UK and Scotland. Here in Sweden, we drink loads of coffee.
Yes.
Isn't coffee waste also a big source for the mushroom entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. Yeah. In two ways. I mean, at the primary end, where it's grown, coffee waste is in developing countries. Is a fantastic opportunity for people who are often on very low wages to take that waste and do something profitable with it. So the work of Gunter Pauli in the blue economy, there's a great case study on people in Tanzania, Kenya, using the plant waste to grow mushrooms, medicinal and edible, which is a source of cash flow, which gives them an income. At the other end, our end, where we drink the coffee, you produce these grounds. Historically, it's gone in the bin. Okay, people have begun to realise, one, it's a fantastic source of chemicals in there, which if you apply certain techniques, you can extract those to produce valuable biochemicals, so oils and other things. Then the grounds themselves are a fantastic substrate for growing mushrooms. So there's a great example in the centre of Paris where entrepreneurs have got together to put coffee ground waste collected from the coffee shops into shipping containers, dark and cool, to grow mushrooms using young, unemployed people to give them a job, something worthwhile. And then they sell those mushrooms into the Michelin-star restaurants in Paris. They're fresh, they're high quality. So the story doesn't end there. As a result of that process, then the coffee waste is decomposed and produces a really high quality compost. If you put coffee waste straight onto your ground, it's quite good as a conditioner. But because it breaks it down, it turns it into a much better compost for water retention, the soil fertility, so you get that positive impact on soil systems if you then sell that on. So you get this sort of complex utilisation of a material that historically has been treated as a waste and a cost.
You make it circular and you appreciate and understand the ecosystem of it all and try to...
And all around the world there are huge stores of biological waste material that people have never recognised as having additional sources of value.
You mentioned a couple of examples. Always, since most of these listeners and viewers are probably here in are Swedish and represent Swedish companies. Do you have any examples here? You mentioned a few examples also this morning. I think it was the H&M example.
Sure.
Would you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, H&M are a very interesting company. They're very interested in the circular economy. Now, one of the issues there is the prices of cotton and synthetic fibres, which are central to the H&M business, prices increasing. So, and I think someone gave me a figure the other day. They have something like 54 fashion turnovers a year.
Yeah.
You know, like more than one a week. Yeah. So they're selling a lot of material to consumers in the linear model. Yeah. Okay. And the question is, well, what happens to that material? Where does it end up? Some of it ends up in charity shops. Yeah. Some of it ends up in wardrobes unworn. A lot of it ends up in landfill. So if you start to think about circularity, what does it mean for a company like H&M? You know, if they could get that material back, and they know what's in it because it's their product. So if it's cotton mixed or pure synthetic, that has quite a significant value. So I can't remember the latest figures, but a ton of cotton, a ton of polyester, a ton of polypropylene, you know, these are valuable materials. So they've started to work with third parties to provide in-store collection facilities to encourage and incentivise consumers to bring back clothing to the store. And you think, well, why would consumers do that? You know, for the goodness of their heart, maybe. It's a bit inconvenient. So that old model of, you know, appealing to people's better interests, we've tried that in the past. This is quite clever. H&M will offer a credit note on the next purchase. There you go. So it starts to tie together some interesting things. They get the product back, valuable to them. Yep. The consumer thinks, hang on, you know, where's my cut in this? Yep. Depending on how much they bring back, they can get a credit note. What do H&M get? They get the customers coming back for a further purchase. Yep. So that then encourages H&M then to think through, well, if they're going to bring it back, we want this to be as pure a material as possible. Yeah. So if it's cotton, we want to reuse it, or we want to use it for secondary purposes. We don't want to fill it with toxins or flame retardants or whatever. We want to know exactly what's in it, so it starts to affect the product design. It's early days yet, but H&M are a really interesting company in this area.
Interesting. And there's other Swedish, and I also just briefly, we should round off soon, but I wanted to say a few words about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, because it's really you're doing really important work, and there's other, besides, I think H&M is part of it, and companies like Ragn-Sells and IKEA and several others, I think, Swedish companies. And not saying that these are perfect companies, but they're really making a proactive, ambitious effort to make this work, to make money while doing good for the society and for the customers, and do it in a profitable way. This is really not a doing good type of thing, isn't it? It's really reinventing and finding ways to make more money and using the resources we have available.
I think Bill McDonough captures it quite well. He says, "Don't save the planet, save your business."
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Briefly, what is the, just in 30, 40 seconds, what is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation about?
Ellen MacArthur is the figurehead. She's a round-the-world sailor who gave up sailing to develop this economic framework, this economic model, because of her observation of what was happening in the world. So she created the foundation to accelerate the transition to a circular economy through education, through working with business, and what they're really interested in is how do you achieve it at scale. So this is not a minor issue in a one country. This is how do you shift the linear economy to a circular economy at scale. And she's surrounded herself with some really great people, people like Marcus Zils, who's a lead figure in the McKinsey reports that stimulated a lot of interest in this area. She's got a fantastic advisory panel. They've collated some of the world's biggest corporates, some of the most interesting, innovative startups around the world to be part of this sort of frontline movement, and they're having great impact. And most interestingly, lots and lots of other groups are picking up the agenda and developing it in their own particular ways in their own particular areas, which is what the foundation always set out to achieve.
Okay, great. Yeah, being a platform, so to enable others.
Being a platform to
make it happen.
Yeah, and to achieve what they can achieve, but they say this needs to be this is about everybody. The circular economy applies to everything.
Yeah. It's a great idea. I'd like to ask you also for maybe some parting words. I think a lot of the people watching and listening to this are maybe partly, some of them partly believers into this.
Sure.
Some of them are not quite there. What are
Sure.
some of the, let's say, parting words, the reason why, if not all, most of us should really try to understand this and embrace this, both from a responsibility type of view, because we want to hopefully leave our businesses and the world a better place for our kids and their kids, rather than just exploiting it for the short-term profit and so forth. So what are some of the, you would like to see some of the trends you see, or some of the arguments why this is important, and why people should continue to look into it?
Sure. Well, this morning I sort of presented a slide to sort of discuss the strategic challenges that a lot of businesses are facing, not just in Sweden, not just in the UK, but everywhere. And if you're confronting these strategic challenges, you need to do something different. Okay, and the circular economy is a very interesting innovation framework for doing something different. And I think what is interesting is when people start to look at it, they start to have a sort of an aha moment to say, well, this seems so obvious. Yeah. It's alluringly simple, it's very elegant, it's very coherent, and people get it. It's not perceived as a threat. Yeah. It's not a guilt trip. Yeah. It's not pointing the finger at any individual, but it's saying that we need to make a shift from linear to circular. It's an economy that applies to everything for everybody. So the other challenge that everyone's facing, including Sweden, is unemployment, youth unemployment, incomes, productivity levels, competition from other economies. Everybody's facing real challenges. So we've got a generation coming through. So, well, what's the future going to hold for the next generation? What I really like about the circular economy, it's a can-do attitude rather than a can't-do attitude. Some of the other frameworks, and you've mentioned some of them about responsibility, tends to put a bit of the blame back on you as an individual. You know, so it's all about you and what you're doing. What I like about the circular economy is it tells you what you can do. It gives you the building blocks. It gives you the tools, and it says, right, go ahead and do it. And the examples I gave this morning are a really good example of how people are doing it. And once you get it, you look at the world in a very different way. You can't go back to a linear mindset.
That's good. And I think, you're alluding to the word responsibility, and I get a sense that we're way beyond corporate social responsibility, CSR. This is more about corporate opportunities of how we can change the game.
And consumer opportunity. If you've got no money, you're a young person, you're unemployed, you've got no money, what do you do? What do you do? Well, you can start up a business, but how do you access the stuff that everyone else has got access to? Well, businesses like Airbnb, Zipcar, clothing rentals, they give you a different way to achieve a particular quality of life and satisfy certain needs that you can't do in the linear model if you haven't got money or a job. So actually it's very appealing. It's a very appealing model for people who are in that area, and there's a lot of people like that, all over Europe or all over the world. So I find it a very interesting model for taking on some of those issues as well.
Sounds great. So we'll wrap up. We're here in Stockholm now. It's 2014. Hopefully we'll keep in touch, and I'll make sure you get over here sometime very soon again, hopefully, to talk more about this. But let's play with the thought that we're here in 10 years from now.
Sure.
Soon you have this conversation. What sort of picture do you see ahead of you in the landscape of the circular economy and the world here in Sweden and globally?
Okay. If you invite me back, make sure it's sunny.
Yeah, I'll try to.
Okay.
it's
cold and wet.
In November
cold
day.
And wet. Yeah, we have plenty of that in England. So okay, that's the only criteria. Or snow. I like snow.
Okay, good.
Okay, in 10 years' time, well, a lot of businesses that we see around today will have disappeared. Yeah, because they haven't been able to make the shift. I think we'll see continual rise in commodity prices, in resource prices, price volatility. I think we're going into a very unstable economic future. Therefore, we've got to change. Okay, so and what I would hope to see in 10 years' time is some of the examples that I've hinted at this morning are mainstream. that it becomes the business as usual. So that I'm looking around this room where we're doing this interview with furniture and lights and bottles and cameras. Those will have been designed in different ways. Those will have been the business model in which we gain access to these products and services will have shifted. And as we walk around Stockholm, we'll see sort of all sorts of entrepreneurial activity, which sort of reflects the attitude to remanufacture, to reuse, to repair, to refurbishment in very, very intelligent, high-tech ways. So this is not a low-tech. This is not going back. This is not a low-tech model. You know, so I should be able to go and purchase a credit card from a vendor or get it out of the vending machine. I can hook into a small electric car in the middle of Stockholm that enables me to drive out, you know, and have a look around. I get charged by the kilometre. I can then bring it back to the nearest charging point and leave it there for the next person. Okay, and you start to see these big infrastructure, big system changes that you're starting to see in certain places like Canada, Amsterdam, Berlin. You know, and I think we'll see a very different approach to things like property development, to real estate, to banking, to finance. So that's what I would expect to see, that, you know, some of the fancy stuff around products is interesting, but it's all that stuff that lies underneath and behind it, which I think is the really, really interesting stuff, because that's what often sort of controls and dictates a lot of our behaviours. You know, transport, housing, access to, you know, sort of finance.
And that's really also part of business job, isn't it? To take these fundamental needs of society and make something really valuable from it. Use this now.
So maybe
logic.
So maybe instead in Sweden, instead of having, I don't know what your income tax rates are.
They're high.
Give me what, 60, 70, 80%?
Then you probably need to make a lot of money, so it's increasingly. But
okay, so
30,
rather
40,
than
50,
rather than a 50% tax on labour, we would see a 60% tax on resource consumption. Okay, so labour wouldn't be taxed in Sweden.
That's an interesting idea.
Okay, but everything we consume would be taxed, and that would create a massive mind shift. And you're just starting to see some people thinking about this in the role of taxation and financial incentives. You know, you're seeing it in the States, you're seeing it here. You know, why do we tax labour so heavily?
I'm already looking forward to 2024 to see you.
Well, you're young enough to be able to.
You'll be around too.
I'll still be around.
You'll be around.
Yeah. So
bring your wife too, and we'll have this chat, and hopefully we'll see you, of course, before.
Okay, so we'll make that a deal then, Olaf. Okay, 2024.
2024.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
The Hilton won't be here.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Airbnb has
Airbnb
conquered the world.
Yeah, or some equivalent. Hilton will have reinvented itself. It will have to. It'll have to, or else it'll go out of business.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay.
And thank you so much for listening in. See you next time.
Okay. Thank you.